probably this comes toward the tail end, but it makes more sense now to put this section in at this point. It's basically the meat of the course that I think we need to take with us going forward. I think we can all agree that there's been a major shift in the worldviews from worldviews, a biblical worldview, more and more towards the secular worldview, and now we've got some socialist worldviews and communist worldviews, all kinds of worldviews. And so what I wanted to do tonight, this will probably take this week, and maybe next week we can do our questions and answers. How did we get here? What caused this? Because if we understand how we got here into this crazy worldview world, we can start looking at some things we can do to helpfully bring us back. For the most part, I think the Christians that I talk with nowadays, they realize that it's probably time for us to stand up and say something, do something. It's going down faster and faster, and anyway, I think we feel the need to get involved. So the close out on this first 3 or 4 slides is how do we get involved? And then we get into the questions. The reason it's in the education section is because the process of education is the tool that was used to get us where we are today. So we're going to learn some new words, some new phrases, and hopefully we'll all learn something about how we got here. All right, so we're looking at the education, and we're looking at something called the WCP and the APP. Let me go ahead and, all right, one more. Put that down the bottom. All right, I don't know if you can read that down there in the bottom. But I'm going to start all the way back around 400 BC, Plato. And the tool that was used at that point to establish a worldview was called episteme, which is the combination of gnosis and paideia. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but episteme, if you've been in my classes before, you've heard me use the phrase a lot. It's ontology or epistemology. When people say, well, this is a fact and that's a fact, what I'm looking for is that really a fact, or is that how you learned the fact? When you touch a hot stove and get burned, that's a fact. How did you learn it? You learned it by touching the hot stove, okay? So the episteme is the how you learn something. Back in 400 BC, that was a combination of gnosis and paideia. Gnosis is the Greek word for knowledge. Like if they knew something that anybody else didn't know, that would be a Gnostic. And if you didn't know something that you're supposed to know, you'd be an agnostic, okay? So that's the gnosis, the Greek word for knowledge. Paideia is a word that unfortunately doesn't even translate well. In fact, I'm not sure if there's a well-established dictionary translation of paideia. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of make one up. Bear with me here. And you probably can't read that at the bottom. This says paideia. I'm using the word enculturization. All right. I don't know if that is a word or not, but a process, culture, that cultureization, the process of being imprinted upon. The total substance of what process you employ in order to imprint on the next generation of folks coming up what your culture expects of you is paideia, okay? Actually comes out of the Greek pedagogos, pedagogy, yeah, which we get pedagogy from. All right, and interestingly enough, I'll go ahead and say it. The original, the pedagogos, or in the Greek, the word means to lead or to teach, but back in 400 BC, if you look at some of the culture, some of the materials was written using the word paideia back in the 400 BC range. It even had a further implication and implied that you were not just teaching, but you were walking with your student. So if you're taking the student by the hand and living and walking with them, back in the 400 BC area, they would actually have maybe a slave, or they would hire someone, the family would hire someone to stay with the kids, walk the kids to and from school, literally teach them on a daily basis, all day long, how the culture works. So in addition to just learning some knowledge, some gnosis, they learned by example what to be like in order to be in the culture. So that's paideia. WCP is the Western Christian paideia. The Western Christian paideia was basically the paideia that started, I think we're going to get to it, I think it's like maybe 650, 700 AD, and stayed with us very firmly right up until maybe 1900s. We started to fall apart in the 1900s. Other countries fell apart sooner. We managed to keep it up until the 1900s, but definitely when our country was formed in the 1770 area, the Western Christian paideia was the culture, right? Not necessarily the religion. It infers that we're a Christian religion, but it was really the basis upon which the Christian religion works. The theology of the Christian religion is the basis of the culture. And so this is the culture of the Western Christian paideia. APP is the American Progressive Paideia, and that is where we're ending up today. All right. So how did we get there? All right. So back 400 BC, we were talking about episteme, or the paideia that was used back then was basically on knowledge and teaching them. In the Greek and the Roman world, the paideia was pretty much defined as the good life. So as you were learning how to fit into the culture, as your instructor, your walk along, your teacher, is basically explaining to you how as you look around the society, obviously some people doing some things, living in some way, were having a lot better life than other people. And so how do you aspire towards that good life? And that good life was the paideia they were trying for. But back in that time, it had literally no checks and balances. So if you wanted to go for the good life, you went for the good life. And in the legal system, in the culture system, there really wasn't a throttle on that. You just go for it, whatever you want to do. And then around 700 AD, we needed a long-term goal. Okay, we needed a long-term goal. What's happening in the Christian world around 700 AD? We basically got what will become the Catholic Church somewhere in the late 500s, early 600s. By the 700s, we're beginning to see what is later going to be the Roman Catholic Church. We're beginning to see an organization now that is wanting to establish a paideia, a good life, define a good life. And the way they defined the good life was kingdom and heaven. So literally, you can point to the birth of the WCP, probably in that time frame, where the Christian organization coming together basically says the concept of heaven and all that eternity is built upon, Christianity is built upon, and the kingdom here on earth. So on earth, you're in the kingdom, and if you did well, you went to heaven, and that became the WCP. And that's 700, and that lasted for a long time. Literally, that lasted for well over 1,000 years in Christian countries. I'm not talking about China or India or any of those other countries. All right, whoops, I'm going too fast. All right, so 1787, the U.S. Constitution. The U.S. Constitution, if you look at the U.S. Constitution, was really written on the WCP with checks and balances. Okay, in fact, we push it back to the Declaration of Independence, 1776, which obviously very recently we should be aware of. The reason that, or the evidence that shows that we are, in fact, a Christian nation. And when I use the phrase Christian nation, I don't mean that everybody's a Christian. I mean it's a nation built upon Christian principles. When Jefferson wrote that we believe that we are a people with certain inalienable rights that come from our Creator, such as life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, that concept of individual personal rights that comes from a creator, not a king or the guy with the biggest stick or the biggest army or whatever else, that those rights literally came from a creator, and they are inalienable, and we take these truths to be self-evident. So at that point, there were already, through Thomas Jefferson and the Locke and a few other people that were involved in the writing of the Declaration of Independence, they were already aware of the concept of absolute truth. All right, so they made that leap. They've gone from all the truth based on the evidence that I see, and that I add onto that, on top of that evidential truth, I can now add that leap of faith that basically gives me the absolute truth defined in God's word, that now I have a WCP, which is inalienable and, forgot the word already, I just used it. Self-evident, I'm sorry, self-evident. And that's just a way of saying I've absolutely gone over the edge now, and I'm into the absolute truth range. So the Constitution is what's putting together the Western Christian Paideia and adding the checks and balances. Why check? What's any idea what the checks and balances might be?
Well, we see that in the form of government that is established with the executive and judicial and legislative branches, and how each offset one another and check one another's power, and that's in recognition of man's sinful nature, our inclination for sin.
Yeah, yeah. And in fact, if you take that down a level to the basic roots, I'm actually going blank this morning or this evening. The idea, I'll come back to it. I just had a brief thought and then forgot it already. Yep, I forgot about it. I'll come back to it. All right. In the 1800s to essentially today, the trend was that the original foundation of our country was based on the Christian principles as seen by a whole bunch of deists. Okay. Now, deists has got several meanings that are applicable, but basically the way they looked at a deist was a belief in a God that created everything. But after he created everything, he said, "Okay, I'm done," and left, and you're on your own. Okay, there's more to it than that. But basically, what they saw was, yes, we understand there's a God. We accept that. We understand that the rights are inalienable. They come from God. And we understand that the rights that you have are basically well defined, and they're not something that comes from mankind. However, they leave God out of the picture after that, so that God is no longer sustaining his creation. The creation goes on for as it ticks along. So they start off with deists, and then they over time between 1800 and 2020, we now move to what's called humanists. Um, a humanist is a step up above what I call materialism. A materialist is one who basically believes, literally at the absolute truth level, even though they can't prove it, they believe that time, space, and material is everything. The universe was created. It was created either as Genesis 1:1 talks about it, or it was created through a big bang as we get today. But literally everything came from nothing. Poof, here's the universe. And this universe consists of all sorts of stuff, but it boils down to time, space, and material. And material is material / energy, because those two things can go back and forth. So basically, a materialist says that everything that we see, hear, touch, taste, smell, and think about falls into that category, time, space, material. Anything outside of that does not exist. Okay? A humanist adds on top of that view the fact that the human at the top of this chain of time, space, material evolution is now the supreme controller of this time, space, material, and they can decide how and where things work. So they put the human control over TSM, and now that they're considered humanists. Side note, problem with that. If time, space, and material were all created at the same time, who created it? And where are they? If everything that we see here, touch, taste, and smell, all the time, space, and material was created, you need something there ahead of time to create it. So by definition, even in their own definition of you need something that is outside of time, space, material in order to create the time, space, material. But even the humanists will not accept that. The basic theory is in that sphere is if I spend enough money on enough research long enough, I'll find it. Okay. The flip side is they accuse us of the God of the gaps, and they're working on the reality of the gaps. Okay. Anyway, that's just a side note. So we got humanists. The humanists work towards progressive. Progressive is basically a movement away from WCP. Progressive is we'll define progress in a minute. And then today we've gone all the way now to the APP. It was actually a number of years ago, but the American Progressive Paideia is where all of this chain has led us. All right. So 1900 is when humanism starts to take shape, but it's in the minority. Okay. The WCP is still a very evident controlling cultural identifier all the way up to the 1900s. In fact, back in the early stages of the country, you've heard of Alexis de Tocqueville, maybe? He basically spent a couple of years traveling around the country trying to, what makes this country so great? And literally he decided the country is great because they're religiously great. They're Christians. They are great in their WCP. They're WCP. And if they cease to be great in WCP, they will no longer be a great country. So, and that concept certainly was very present up to the 1900s, but it's still a minority. It's not a majority yet. Humanism, not a majority. The majority WCP can't teach humanism. This is a process whereby the seeds were set such that if you were into the WCP as strongly as possible back during the time when the WCP would probably be closer to what we would call legalism. With that kind of a mindset, you cannot, or you should not, you shall not go in and teach humanism. You want to know about it, it's just worldly, it's out there, and we're not supposed to be out there, and you leave them alone. And it wasn't a problem because they were in a minority. All right? So the WCP in the early 1900s basically ignored the rise of the humanists because that was the world. And the WCP doesn't get involved in the world. We stay in the spiritual. And you can't add, then take away what's in the way. What these mean, what this is trying to say is, if the education that you were experiencing, you were being imprinted with, already said something, then chances are you couldn't take it away to put something else in its place. Okay? You couldn't come along and say, all right, God's out, Jesus is out, now God is in. Well, okay, let me pull God out and put a deist in, and so forth. People would get, it would get them all twisted up if you start taking something out of the culture so you can put something in. All right? We notice it when something disappears, even with the WCP. So the WCP was forcing the humanists to try to change to what later would become the APP without taking something away from them that they valued in order to put something else in that the APP wanted. Can I get that? All right, so they couldn't be done easily that way. So what they basically came up with is a long-term view. And this long-term view says, all right, we understand that it's going to take 1 or 2 generations in order to do this. We cannot jerk something like Jesus out of the culture without somebody saying, hey, where'd Jesus go? Right? But if we take one or two generations and slowly make the change, it's like the frog in the pot of hot water, you won't notice it. So over one or two generations, why don't we just go for the kids? All right, so we've got a couple of...
And from Madeline Murray O'Hare, we've got what happened today. I mean, you know, the recent. And that's when it really started, where they started working on the kids.
They actually started, well, we'll get to that in a slide, but yeah, they actively started working on the kids prior, in the 30s and 40s. We'll get to that in a slide now. So basically what they figured was they're going to have the attention of the kids for 16,000 hours. From essentially kindergarten till graduation, they have got the attention of the kids for 16,000 hours. And all of those WCP people, they're not listening, they're not watching. All the people that are starting to become not WCP, they're busy living their lives. They're not watching. As long as the kid comes home in one piece and he says nice stuff, and we can very gradually sneak into those 16,000 hours the change from WCP to APP. And they started to officially design a program to do that. What they said was, you can't hide education. If I have a textbook sitting on a kid's desk that has this written in it, I can't pull this written in it out, but I can do the next version I print of that textbook. I can make a little subtle change. And the next version of the textbook, I can make more subtle change until eventually Jesus is out of the textbooks. God is out of the textbooks. Anything we don't want them to talk about is out of the textbooks. That's the textbooks being the education. You can't pull education out without them noticing it, but you can use paideia. All right? Remember I said paideia is like pedagogy. It is a person or some organization that walks with your student. So if we can get the educational system who's spending 16,000 hours of time with your kids, and they're walking with them day in and day out, and they're talking to those kids, and they're showing by example a different culture, they can enculturization the kids to a new idea.
That's when all the homeschooling and the private schooling started.
Yeah. I watch a guy by the name of Dr. Frank Turek. I don't know, faith being atheist, and he's got all sorts of stuff. And when he does a Q&A at the end of each of his lectures. And when somebody comes up to the microphone to ask a question, and that kid actually knows what they're talking about, okay? Most of the kids that come up to ask questions are like watching that thing on the news where they interview people on the beach. It's like, oh. But when somebody comes up to the microphone that really knows what they're talking about and has read the Bible, and Frank Turek will stop and go, hey, folks, this one was homeschooled. All right, so yeah, that's it. All right, so they use the paideia, the pedagogy, to do the transformation. And then along comes this, what's called Frankfurt School. The Frankfurt School in Germany was actually kind of a resulting of a group of people, Karl Marx, Frank Nietzsche, a few other folks, that were basically trying to push the new AP or the new paideia that leaves Christianity, basically get Christianity out and turn all other associations, civilizations, interactions between people to the concept that eventually became known as critical something theory, critical race theory, critical econ theory, critical something theory. It started over in Germany by these professors, if you would. It was brought over to Columbia University in the 1930s, I think, early 30s. And that in combination with John Dewey. John Dewey literally was the American education system in the late 40s up to the 50s. He literally wrote the textbooks. He wrote out of Chicago. He was the authority on how to build an education system. Well, he got hooked up with these guys and the American Federation of Teachers and the National Education Association, AFT and the NEA. So the combination of this new paideia coming out of the Frankfurt School with John Dewey, AFT and the NEA, they literally said, we've got 16,000 hours. We can make little changes and nobody will notice. We can go 2 generations. The years can sit back up here. It's going to take 1 or 2 generations. So it's 1930 now. We can have this done, by maybe the 70s, 80s, a couple of generations down the road, and they won't notice. And they were right. All right. So basically, Jesus Christ was changed to a generic God. And you can literally follow this in the textbooks, in the school books. I've got some of the textbooks that came out of Massachusetts back in the late 1700s, early 1800s. And you can literally see textbooks used to be written like with references to the Bible on every page. And the examples that are used in the textbooks were Bible examples. By the time you get to the 1900s, Jesus went to God, and then the God within the last, say, 60, 70 years, within the generation that I basically belong to, it went all the way to the progressive collective. Has anybody heard that before? The collective? The collective, if you think about Christianity, who is responsible for your salvation? If you're going to be saved and go to heaven, whose job is it? Is the interactive portion. Hello? Whose job is it to get saved? Your own. An individual. John can't save me and I can't save somebody else. It is an individualistic concept to be Jesus-like, to be saved, okay? But if I don't want to do that stuff, however, and I belong to a group of people that, according to the current society, they are all doing the right stuff to go to heaven, then I am part of that collective. And it's amazing today, it's not really amazing, it's kind of depressing, but the number of people that that I'll interact with that basically say, well, I am in the right group, I'm not worried. I don't do that. This group doesn't do that. We are collectively, we give 20% tips on our restaurant bills. We don't lie unless it's necessary. We love our neighbor's dog. These are all the wonderful things that I do. And I'm certainly better than that guy over there. So I must be in this collective group. And God is fair. God is love. And he loves everybody. Everybody. I can show you a couple of verses in the Bible that says God loves everybody. Certainly he loves the people in this collective. So if I can just stay in this collective group, I'm going to heaven. Not according to what I do or say or commit myself to, but the group. So literally today, we have groups of people. We have collectives, progressive collectives of people that honestly think that they are fulfilling the societal needs, the culture's needs, God's needs by belonging to a collective.
I honestly don't think they care.
Unfortunately, there's a lot of people in that group too. Yeah. I think, all right, I can't say all because, there's.
But most of them do not care about God, period.
But I believe that it is my opinion that everybody cares somewhat, but they're able to shelve it and put it aside and not think about it. You pray in a foxhole. You've heard that phrase? You want to hear prayers? Listen to a foxhole. Any kind of religion, they're praying. Okay? When you're on the plane and the plane starts going down, everybody's praying. So it's like, I don't care. The plane's crashing. Down you go. Okay. So I think most people, if we can wake them up and get them to speak honestly, they probably care a little bit. But anyway, that's just my opinion. So that's the. Can you see how it's gone from Jesus to God to a deistic God to a collective? Yeah, anyway. All right, 1900 to 1940. The progressives focused on the schools, the majority focused on capitalism. Basically, from 1900 to 1940, we had a huge growth in our capitalistic society. We came out of the agricultural / industrial revolution in the 1840s and 50s and 60s. Uh, by the 1860s, we had all kinds of machines and stuff that plowed the ground and picked the cotton and ginned it up and all sorts of stuff. And then comes along 1900, we got steam engines, reciprocating engines, and all kinds of engines and stuff happening and factories going on. And some guy came on and invented a process called the Bessemer process. And all of a sudden he was making steel, not pot iron anymore, making steel. And the steel was fantastic, and we could build everything out of steel. So by the time we got to 1940, we were building some pretty big steel ships. We were building airplanes. We were building whatever it took by the time we got to 40. And who was doing that? The majority of the folks were doing that. The majority, even some folks in the WCP, were, hey, I got to put bread on the table. So I'm over here working with the progressives in the capitalistic side. Or excuse me, I'm working on the capitalistic side. I am not paying attention to the progressives. So if there's 1,000 people going to the factory, but only 15 or 20 people teaching in the school, they were able to go in the school with 15 people slowly, bit by bit, over 2 generations. They can get APP in while we're paying attention to the dollar. We're paying attention to the economy. 1929-30, yeah. Here's where the progressive movement officially is. In the textbooks, they'll tell you it started. This is basically when progressive movement, which is still kind of small, okay? We're only talking like the Frankfurt School, some of the professors at Columbia University, plus Franklin Delano Roosevelt, John Dewey, they start working towards the democracy gospel. So up until now, we've had the Christian gospel. Now there is an honest, serious attempt by these few people who happen to be extraordinarily influential on the education system to build the democracy gospel. When something goes wrong today in Washington, what's one of the first things you hear screamed? It's going to ruin the democracy. The democracy is going down the tubes. This is the democracy gospel. How many people, when you ask them what kind of government you have, actually say, I have a constitutionally based republic with democratically elected representatives? Do you ever hear that? You probably never hear that. You hear, we have a democracy. Why don't we have a democracy? Because of the world Christian paideia. Democracies are not Christian based. Democracy is whoever's got the most votes by one wins. Okay? It's like 2 wolves deciding with a lamb what's for dinner. Okay? Democracies don't last very long. Okay? But the democracy gospel is where they're going. And basically, the democracy gospel is defined as progress forward is good, history is irrelevant, and science is truth. And that sounds like an awful lot of stuff I see on television right now with half the country, at least, talking about, well, as long as progress forward is good, then we can do this, that, or the other. And history is irrelevant. You know, yeah, we know. You tell me that socialism has never succeeded. Yeah, I know we've had 117 examples, and we've had examples of socialistic governments all the way back to 1,000 years, and every single one of them goes the same way, turns into a dictatorship, death and misery and that sort of stuff. But they didn't try it this way. And we got a little twist. What are they missing? What does the WCP have that democracy gospel doesn't? What it boils down to is the willingness to accept the fact that we're talking about people, human beings. Okay? People, human beings. And guess what? Human beings, when left to their own devices, are not going to play well in a democracy. Anytime you put 100 people together and say, okay, we're going to take from the folks with the highest ability to make something, how this goes, take from those according to the need to the ability. What's that saying? It's a communist saying. Take from those that can make, give to those who need it. Okay, that leveling, the idea of leveling it. How long does it take a group of people to realize, hey, if I don't have to work, I'm still going to get to the same place. I'm going to get all the same stuff. There's a story about this, I think a history professor that was discussing this, and he basically said, all right, for the next quarter, we're going to average all the grades. And whatever the average is, everybody gets. How many A students you feel like they worked their butts off to get another A? How many F and D students do you think stepped up to the plate and worked harder? No, because they realized they're all going to get the same grade. And guess what? At the end of the quarter, grade was F. Because everybody was driven to the lowest common denominator. We don't work when we don't have to, okay? But that's where the Christian paideia helps us understand we have a different way of life. We're not driven by this leveling of outcome. History is irrelevant. We just throw that out, and science is truth. Science is truth has killed us. There's a saying that I use a lot, and I can't remember where I stole it. Science does not say anything. Scientists do. Science is collecting and analyzing, forecasting, predicting, and testing on data. The data doesn't do it itself. The data is not analyzed itself. Scientists collect it. They organize it. They analyze it. They then test it based on theories. And they look for predictability. All of those things are scientists working. The science itself says nothing. The science just provides the material for the scientists to analyze. Is science truth? Well, the basic data probably is. I may not be able to defend that when you get to quantum chromodynamics and stuff, but for the most part, the stuff that we can touch and feel and see and hear and taste, that data is probably reliable. But our biases come in when we start to collect it and measure it. All right? I mean, recent example is, remember that curve, the hockey stick curve of the warming temperature of the Earth? And they're looking for what kicked it up here over here. And they figured it was Industrial Revolution, it was the wrong place. It turns out that they were getting most of their data from sea surface temperatures, and they were using thermometers that were placed in the engine room or in the smokestack area. And amazingly enough, the Earth doesn't get hotter. Hello, that's bias. And scientists have a lot of bias all the way through the publishing of their final papers. Trust me. If you want to find out where science is going, ask them where the money's coming from. Most of the science that we deal with today in today's society, way too much of it is being influenced by what my financial sponsor is expecting to see or hear. Anyway, so science is truth? No, science is not truth. Scientists are heavily biased, and that bias is what we're listening to as truth. Questions or comments on here? I said a lot of stuff. Okay, setting the stage. All right, let's continue. We're trying to get from 1800 to 2020. All right. By the 1950s, the WCP was beginning to be removed from the schools. So now we're actually seeing officially the government stepping in and saying, we got to get this WCP out. Why? Because the progressives are not the little few people anymore. They're not the majority yet, but they are in the places that control things as a large minority. And they're starting to have influence, like in the court system. The Warren Court, everybody loves the Warren Court, right? In 1962, we used to start school with a prayer. No more. 1963, Bible reading in school. No more. 65, praying aloud during lunch. No way. Unconstitutional. We literally had the Supreme Court stepping in and saying God doesn't exist in the schools anymore. Well, that's good. They've been trying to get the God out of the schools all along for the last 100 years. And they're winning. They're winning. They got these kids for 16,000 hours, and in 16,000 hours, they ain't hearing a lot of God. And if their mommy and daddy are busy holding down 2 jobs so they can make a decent living in this super economy that's going great and not really paying attention to what's happening in schools, they're changing. They don't hear God. They won't hear God. Unless they're a good, solid Christian family, they may have no idea about Jesus and God and everything else. Government is starting to help them with the move now. In 1965, the WCP was essentially removed, the APP was in place, and the first generation was now running the show. So the first part of the second generation that started under the John Dewey, FDR, let's just do this quietly and slowly in little bits. Let's get rid of the WCP. Let's move over to the APP. And then along comes a president and the Department of Education in 2009 actually takes the thrust of the court system that pulls God out of the classroom and comes up with a new thing called Common Cause. Anybody remember Common Cause? We were so busy. The people sitting in this room, I'm almost guaranteed, were so busy doing other things, either financially or spiritually, that they didn't pay a whole lot of attention to Common Cause. I didn't. What's Common Cause? Common Cause was Obama's race to the top. In the race to the top, by doing certain things in your classroom, you can get additional money for your school. It was a financially rewarded program that allowed you to race to the top by doing Common Cause. What was Common Cause? Common Cause was a series of textbooks, essentially entire curriculum, from like third grade all the way to like 10th or 11th grade, a pre-written collective curriculum that was, for all intents and purposes, APP. There was no WCP in there. There was no mention of God or Jesus or anything else in there. Called Common Cause. Essentially, Common Cause eliminated reason and replaced it with equity. Reason was replaced with equity. I've got a lecture that I do on the equity, equality sort of thing. But equity, in a nutshell, equality is when everybody has an equal opportunity to start. Equity is when we all end up in the same place at the end. And that was Common Cause. We're trying to get everybody to the same place at the end. Why? Because if they're in the same place at the end, they are now part of the collective. And are they worried about the collective going to heaven? No. They're worried about the collective pleasing the APP, the progressive paideia. So if you fit into the APP, the American Progressive Paideia, then you are a successful member of the collective, and the collective is now as equity. Well, except for the few people that are on the top calling the shots in the equity. But basically, we're reducing everybody to the lowest common denominator, all right? The equity, that's the collective. Example, who took SAT tests here? Anybody? All right, SAT tests, the Scholastic Aptitude Test. It used to be a very accurate predictor of whether or not you were going to get through college or not. And students would literally take this thing 2 and 3 times to try to get a grade high enough that they could be put on their resume to apply for colleges. All right. Part of Common Cause was that SATs were too white. More white people took the SATs than non-white people took the SATs. Therefore, it was too white. It was essentially equal to systemic racism. In 2016, the SAT test was rewritten in Common Core language.
And you could notice it on the TVs, every advertisement.
Yeah. So what happened after you make the Common Core SAT happen? You probably can't see that in the back. Prediction, see that little arrow? The predictability of the SAT test went to the basement. Taking an SAT test literally said nothing about graduating from college. It became useless. But that's right, it was replaced by equity. I need so many of these kinds of people and so many of these kinds of people. We're all going to get to the same level and we're all going to be wonderful students. We're all going to graduate with a D. But we're going to have a degree in pottery making or, international fudge making studies, okay? And wonder why I just took out $150,000 in educational loans and nobody wants to hire me, all right? So basically, we're welcome to the APP, Common Cause. All right, ultimately, Common Cause replaced virtue with values. You can literally go through the old textbooks and see how much virtue was mentioned. Virtue is no longer a part of the textbooks. It's now values. What's the matter with values? What's the difference between virtues and values? In a word, standard. Standard. Virtue is how well you measure up to a standard. Do we have any standards that go across every human being? Yeah, it's called God. I mean, we have individual standards in the room and so forth and so on, but of the basic standards, God's standards applies to everybody. And how well you measure up to those standards is a virtue. Replace that with values. Where do values come from? Yourself, your family, your neighborhood, the guy that lives down the street, the city I live in, the party I belong to, who I vote with. Those are where values come from. Any of that sort of stuff come from up there? Probably not. Comes from the society, does not come from the standard above all standard. So the definition now of WCP, the good life, is still God's kingdom, virtuous people, but how many are left? We've essentially tipped the scales now. I know that if you do a Pew study on Christians versus non-Christians, it says that the people in the United States that call themselves Christian is like mid-60s, low 60s. And the people that call themselves nuns have gone all the way up to 30% now, 29. But anyway, yeah, 60 is a bigger number than half, okay? But if you start looking at the people that are actually calling themselves Christians, what do they do? What do they believe? What do they talk about? What's their values? They're APP. They're APP. So at this point, WCP, the good life, God's kingdom, belongs to the virtuous people, and the value people have left us in the dust. APP, the good life, that's now humanism. Values are equity and personal. Equity and personal values are equitable, personal, and we're driving towards social justice. So now the measure of How well you fit into the APP, the American Progressive Paideia, is how well you fit into a social justice standard. That's your standard now. Yeah.
Brother Scott, the term social justice reminds me that the language of APP is very non-offensive and intentionally so. Right? It's meant to be non-threatening, to be accepted. What's wrong with social justice? What's wrong with equity? Well, nothing on the surface until you understand the meaning of those terms and how they're applied in the society.
I mean, you're not in favor of social injustice, are you?
Right.
Oh, I think justice happens to be 50% of God. I mean, the Christianity is based on two words: love, justice. God is infinite love, infinite justice. How can you be against justice? Well, like you said, when you start digging into the definition of the word as you're implying it in this paideia, justice here is what the society believes is just, not what God believes is just. Welcome to the world of social justice.
I was told one time that there is no justice on this earth. You're only going to get justice when you stand in front of the.
Yeah. And honestly, I'm hoping rather than justice, I can go for mercy. Grace, please. Justice, I may not come through so well. Anyway, so that was, we're starting the second generation phase. Now, my generation, the baby boomers, were basically the split generation. Half of us were in the first, dribbling into the second. So, and I consider myself a convert. I started in college. I was a first generation guy and very much liberalized. The second generation now, they have gone into what's called postmodernism and social justice based on critical theory oppression, whereas the other of us in the second generation have gone back to WCP. And there's not a whole lot of us. There really is not a whole lot of us. When I look at the Pew studies, the percentages, we're definitely a minority now. All right. All right, let's wrap this thing up. What happened in 2020? What was the force that turned this around or planted the seed for the turnaround?
2020 wasn't it COVID?
You got it. You nailed it. All this progress was being made in the shadows. Society was focused on economics and Christians avoiding the worldly, and then COVID. COVID came along. What happened when COVID hit? The kids were learning from home, and the parents were looking over their shoulders on their laptops to see what they were learning. Mom and dad went ballistic. They woke up. Even the most Christian of Christians that were proud of the fact that they never touched the world, all of a sudden looked over their kid's shoulder at their laptop and saw the world and said, this ain't it. We had now changed from WCP to APP enough so that even everybody else could finally notice it. And COVID was the trigger. So COVID actually started the.
Well, my doctors that I go to, and I talked to them about that. They once told me that they couldn't talk about it because they would lose their license.
Yeah.
But since then, we've had good little talks when I go in.
Just within the last week, one of the young women who had to drop out of their service because she refused to take a vaccination, won a court case, got 4 years of back pay, her old position back. That's just within the last week. So we're beginning to, even the courts are coming around. All right, so the first generation, they're now in power. They're called the shots. They are very strong at the APP. They have the high ground, and they have the social and the corporate institutions behind them. So we've got to now come from behind to try to catch back up again. How do we do that? And if nothing else, these are things you can take with you. How do we do this? We get involved. We take back ownership of the child's education. We own our kids' education. not that babysitter called school. We own it. If we're going to pass it off to the school to get it done, at least demand to see what they're being taught. Take ownership of your child's education. Take back the 16,000 hours. All right? Yeah, they've got your kid for 16,000 hours. You may only have them 8,000 hours. Well, unfortunately, you don't have their attention very long. But as much as you can get of their attention, start filling it with WCP. Walk the walk, talk the talk. Actually show them what WCP is like. You're fighting textbooks that have been written APP now. The textbooks are common cause. If you can homeschool, go for it. Go for it. In culture, love the good and hate the evil. One of the things that the APP does is like what Marty just did. How can you possibly be against justice in social justice? What are you doing? You're basically turning that phrase into something which you as a Christian must hate. I don't do that. No, I don't do that. What does the phrase really mean? And the part of the phrase or that meaning or the understanding of that phrase is good, I'm going to support that good. But even if the phrase sounds great, if it's evil, I'm going to hate it. I'm going to do something about it. I'm running out of time. All right. Encourage CCCE's classical Christian education schools. We're beginning to see a little bit in the States where they're beginning to support funding classical Christian education. I'm beginning to see a couple of court cases here and there that will support Christian classic education. And we can do a lot more. We got a long way to go on that. But through our vote, through our participation in the social organization we belong to, push CCE schools. At the very least, let them compete on a level playing field with the public schools. Fewer integrated subjects anchored to Lonang. A student back in the late 1700s, early 1800s, they had like 4 things that they, like civics, social studies, reading and writing, and some math. There are 5 things, arithmetic. Okay. Nowadays, by the time you get to high school, you've already taken like 12 different topics, different things, and now you're into the electives, and you can take all sorts of stuff. I mean, by the time you graduate to high school, you've probably been exposed to 20 or 30 different fields of study, and you've got nothing useful out of any of them. I mean, you're just getting little smidgens, and the smidgens you're getting are common cause, which is the democracy gospel of the APP. We need to get back to fewer integrated subjects, closer to the arithmetic, reading, and writing, and anchored to Lonang. Is this phrase anybody? Lonang is the abbreviation of the Declaration of Independence. It says, the laws of nature and nature's God. Whatever we be putting in our training must be anchored back to Lonang, the laws of nature and nature's God. That was the document that started this country under WCP, and we've got to anchor our stuff back to that. Almost every textbook I see in high schools today is totally anchored from Lonang. Benjamin Franklin said in 1787, when asked what kind of a government you got, a republic, if you can keep it. Okay? We're not doing a good job keeping it. And I'm 2 minutes over. Sorry. Let's do the questions on education next week.
Pretty good. Thank you.
Seen it coming for years and years and years, and it's coming even more because we got them in the government. This law that people in the government. So we just gotta be good and go to heaven. Oops.